name is Leah Atnett, and I am the Outreach and Professional Development Coordinator for Maryland History Day at Maryland Humanities. In my job, I work with teachers, local social studies coordinators, I visit students in the classroom, and I try to make sure everyone has all the resources that they need to make the most out of the National History Day project. You already know that there are lots of great reasons to do this project with your students. It builds their skills in working with primary sources, engaging in historical inquiry, using sources as evidence, and developing a historical argument. In this video, I'm going to share some tips about the thesis statement, where their argument is summarized to be supported with evidence throughout the project. Even though it's a small part, just one sentence, or commonly in NHD projects, 2 or 3, we know that it's an important part. The first piece of NHD evaluation criteria is the historical argument, also known as the thesis or claim. And an exemplary project will have a historical argument that is consistently supported by analysis and evidence. And even if there is consistent analysis and evidence throughout the project, if there is no clear thesis statement near the beginning of the project, our readers and viewers will lose the thread that ties everything together. Many teachers find writing the thesis to be one of the most difficult parts of the National History Day project for their students. Why is it so difficult? One reason is that the thesis is interpretive. Students need to come up with their own take on a topic, or in a lot of cases, borrow a more well-worn take from their textbooks or from another historian. Another difficulty is that it forces students to take a lot of information and condense it into a few sentences. For younger students or novice writers, even writing complex sentences might be a challenge. I'll address some of those challenges a bit more, but I really want to start from the beginning and show how the thesis takes shape over time. To help students arrive at a solid thesis, they need to start with a solid foundation. Start students with a research question. After they have their topic and have done preliminary research, have them write an open-ended question that they can investigate. This keeps them focused and directed while they are doing the research. The question or questions they ask will evolve as they learn new information and new directions to go with their research. It might encourage them to look at a specific angle of their topic. The thesis will end up being a complex and layered answer to that research question that they develop earlier in their research. And here we've got a sample research question that's going to connect to our sample thesis statement later on. How did Galileo's discoveries shape astronomy as we know it today? You'll also want to make sure that they are keeping up with their annotated bibliography as they do their research, ideally from the very beginning. Those annotations that they make will help your students see what the evidence is telling them, which will help them come to a conclusion about the story that they're telling and what their thesis might be. And we'll come back to why the annotated bibliography is important a little later. The thesis comes later in the process of doing the project. After the research, after the outlining, maybe even after a portion of the writing. Instead of writing the story to fit a preconceived take on the topic, which they might get from a history book, a teacher, or prior knowledge, allow students to dig deep first and find the unique story that they want to tell. This will push them to write a unique thesis. Having the thesis comes later also reinforces the inquiry process and the process of doing history. We make our conclusions after all of the research is in. On to the actual thesis statement. A first step might be to model by showing students examples. Let them know what a good thesis looks like. Here's an example. This is the example that is also used in the student thesis video. In 1633, Italian astronomer Galileo Galilei was arrested because his scientific discoveries about a relatively unknown frontier, space, went against the teachings of the Catholic Church. However, these discoveries inspired his peers to continue their research, and Galileo's work would impact the future of science by improving our understanding and technology of space. In writing this thesis, we've done our research and determined that these are the most important things that we want to highlight for our project. These are the parts of the story that the reader will need right off the bat, and this will set them up to follow along with our argument throughout the project. If this looks too complex for your students to write on their first try, it might help to know that we use a formula to help structure the thesis writing process. This is especially useful for young students or novice writers, but it can really help any student. As your students' skills develop over the years, especially later in high school, they might need the formula less. They'll start to make different types of arguments. But for students doing History Day for the first time, this formula can make a big difference in helping them understand the kinds of arguments that you might make. The formula that we offer students includes the following elements: the who, what, when, and where that are going to help set the stage, the short-term impacts, the long-term impacts, and a connection to the annual NHD theme. I'll go back to our example so you can see where these elements come up. So you can see here we've got the who, what, when, and where in that first sentence to set things up for the reader to understand our claim, and then the interpretive parts, the impacts are in that second sentence. For exhibits and websites, the thesis is often standing alone as the first thing that the audience reads. The who, what, when, and where are the background that we need to set the stage for the claim that is coming next. This is also the reason why NHD thesis statements end up being more than one sentence. Then the claim, the interpretive part of the thesis, resides in what the student has to say about how that event influenced history and how it connects to the theme. Both of those, historical significance and theme connection, are also NHD evaluation criteria, and emphasizing them in the thesis will make sure the reader sees that the student made those interpretations. And it will also remind the students to keep coming back to those ideas throughout their work. After collecting information to fill in the formula, the next challenge for many students is actually taking that information and combining it into 2 or 3 sentences. I hear from many teachers who have students reading and writing below grade level, or teachers with English learners in their classes whose students struggle with writing complex sentences. Giving them some practice opportunities to put together a thesis with provided information might benefit them. And having a practice topic rather than working toward their own project will make it lower stakes for them. They'll feel freer to experiment. So you can see an example of that here. This is taken from a worksheet, and I'll show you where to locate that a little bit later. You could offer just the broken down elements from this page and let the students write the sentences. For practice on their own topics, you might offer a sentence frame that they can fill in. Show examples of thesis statements that use different structures and transition words to help them achieve flow in their writing. This is something that I observe even with on-level students. When they put the info from the formula together, it can read like a list. Arm them with language to show causation, contrast, change, and legacy. In the actual writing, you'll want to help students stay away from common pitfalls like using hypotheticals. Hypotheticals are really tempting as a strong way to argue for the importance of an event, and we are encouraging students to draw those lines of connection from past to present. However, with hypotheticals, it's something that didn't really happen. We want to emphasize that they back up their arguments with evidence, but there's no way to provide evidence for something that didn't happen. So instead, the thesis should only include interpretations for things that did happen. What should you do if your student's claim is not that new or unique? If they borrow the idea behind their claim from a history book? That's a choice you can make for your own classroom, and you need to know your students. We know that it takes extensive research and intellectual labor to come up with a totally unique claim. For a well-known, well-researched event, students would need to look at a very narrow aspect of a topic to find something that's not already in their textbooks. Of course, narrowing down the topic makes for a more unique and nuanced project and a more sophisticated argument, which is great, but not all of your students are going to have the time, the resources, or the motivation to research off the beaten path. in a way that is going above and beyond the scope of what you probably planned for this project. And for more novice researchers, this might be their first time learning what a thesis statement is. Borrowing a claim and putting it into their own words and into the NHD thesis formula will be a step in helping them understand what a good thesis looks like. And as I mentioned, with practice, they'll be better able to make their own claims in the future. So what comes next after the thesis? Next, your students will make sure that they provide evidence to support it. Going back to our example, they will of course provide evidence of Galileo's own work, since that is the main story and likely the part that they are excited about. And they'll do that by interpreting primary sources for us, telling us why those sources are significant. But they'll also be asked to support the other parts of the thesis about the impacts of their topic. How do we know that he influenced others? Do they mention him? Do they build off of the same work that he did? How is our knowledge of space today built off of Galileo's work? And it is crucial that they include evidence, whether that is an image, a quote, a summary of a text, plus their analysis. How does this source support what I am saying? This is where the annotated bibliography comes back, because they've been making those analyses about their sources all along, keeping track of how they helped answer their research questions and how these sources might be useful. Encourage them to use those analyses that they've already made and think about what they can add now that their thesis has taken a clearer shape. That is how the whole historical argument comes together. A strong, clear, arguable thesis and all of our reasoning throughout the project. Before I wrap up, I'd like to share some resources that might help you guide your students in creating a thesis and in other parts of the History Day process. I am at thinkport.org/TPS. This is the landing page for a few Teaching with Primary Sources projects that we collaborate with Maryland Public Television on. Many of you might already be familiar with our inquiry kits, primary source sets in U.S. history, world history, and government that now number over 200. But we also have a small collection of research learning modules designed to guide students through the research project. An icon for this collection also appears in the upper right throughout all of the inquiry kit pages, so you can always find it. After clicking through, you can see that we have 12 modules, from understanding primary and secondary sources, to using primary sources as evidence, to identifying media bias. I'll click through on our thesis writing module. Inside this module, there are 6 pages. The first introduces the topic with a short video. The second gives students a refresher on what the thesis statement is. The third models writing a thesis statement using the formula that we discussed. The fourth and fifth pages allow students to use what they've learned by taking a short quiz on this page and practicing writing a thesis based on provided information. The other modules in this collection follow a similar model, refreshing students' information on different topics and giving them the chance to try it themselves. The other page that I would like to share is the Maryland History Day Teens Teacher Resource Padlet. I'm at padlet.com/mdhistoryday/teacher resources. This Padlet is designed to walk you through a History Day school year with your students, with information about how to get started and how to schedule the History Day timeline, but also scaffolds that you can provide to your students along every step. The section on the thesis statement includes a short video for students, a thesis formula worksheet where students can fill in all of their information, a page of sample thesis statements that correspond to the annual theme. This sheet can give students the chance to see the thesis statements broken down and how they come together. And this section provides other resources as well. I hope you found this video useful. Remember that the Maryland History Day team are always here to help, and you're welcome to reach out to us with any questions about the History Day process, or if you're trying to locate resources to support your students. Good luck with your school year.